The SRA Code of Conduct 2011, 1 year on lessons learned. My initial thoughts are that perhaps it's a little too early to learn any lessons, but let's see by the time we get to the end of the slides whether we have learned any lessons, whether the profession have learned any lessons, and whether us as a regulator has also learned any lessons. I'm happy to take some questions at the end of the session, conscious that I'm from the regulator and you're from the profession. But I'm also happy to speak on a one-to-one basis. Been speaking with Chris this morning from LBS Legal. More than happy to enter into any dialogue about any matters. Right. Moving forward. My name is Mark Faulkner. I'm one of the technical advisors in supervision. We're responsible for the entire regulated community. That's over 11,000 firms, 135,000 solicitors with practicing certificates. We have a unit that comprises relationship management, who are there to constructively engage on a continuous basis with those high-impact firms. Not high-risk, but high-impact firms, the top 200 firms. The other 11,200 odd are the responsibility of supervision. Okay, and our background, we started a pilot last year from January to September. I would encourage you to visit our website regularly. It's a good website. There are the reports on the pilot and the work that we undertook in that pilot. Some of you may have been in firms that were part of that pilot as well, because it's the starting process of our new approach to engagement, our starting approach to outcomes-focused regulation. The handbook is now a year old, and I would refer you as well to what Anthony Townsend said, our chief executive, on the 5th of October in a press release. He said, we've laid the foundations of OFR, which is absolutely right. We have laid the foundations, but our real work is just beginning. We're in a learning process. We're in a development process. You're going through massive change. OFR is a massive change for everyone. It's a continual learning process for us. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we don't underestimate the importance of that work. If you've been on any of the road shows, it talks about constructive engagement and credible deterrent. Those are the sort of things that we're talking about in relation to supervision. We're a key part as a function of the delivery of outcomes-focused regulation, and we genuinely do want to work constructively with firms. But equally, as it says, we will take swift and targeted enforcement action where necessary. That targeted enforcement action, we will adhere to the principles of better regulation, which you're probably familiar with. Section 28 of the Legal Services Act requires us to promote the regulatory objectives. It also requires us to pay due consideration to those principles of better regulation. If you don't know what they are, I'm happy to share them with you later. And the sort of examples of constructive engagement that we've been undertaking is through our thematic work of orderly wind down with firms in financial difficulty. If firms properly report to us at an early stage they're in financial difficulty, what we will then do is work with them to try and effect an orderly wind down. That's been our thematic work from day one, and that's what we're continuing to do. An orderly wind down is important because it avoids that regulatory protective step of intervention that can be an outcome when we're talking about firms in financial difficulty. In relation to enforcement, I don't think we should have any surprises there. We're talking about taking people through the disciplinary process when there's been misappropriation or alleged misappropriation of client monies. That's the sort of thing that is appropriate for us to do. Those sort of people who don't have the probity and integrity in the profession shouldn't be part of that profession. So there shouldn't be any surprises in supervision in those circumstances. Okay, this is really sort of the holy trinity of supervision. We engage, we also regulate, but we also discipline as well. So regulation is about conditions on people's practicing certificates, conditions on recognition of bodies. Discipline is about taking people to the tribunal where appropriate and where proportionate, but equally fining and rebuking when there's been breaches of the rules of conduct. All of this is going under the umbrella of supervision. We'd much rather the majority of our work is undertaken through supervision and constructive engagement. Quick chronology. My favourite is the 8th edition of the guide. It's a good one, I like it. I grew up with it. It's very prescriptive. It tells you exactly what you need to know about what you need to do in practice. If you look at Annex 12A, it will tell you exactly who owns what bit of paper on each file. It's probably wrong in law, to be honest, but you have that comfort of prescriptive rules. We then moved through the Solicitors Code of Conduct, 2007, and then the 2009 edition for legal disciplinary partnerships, that sort of thing, firm-based regulation, and now we've got outcomes-focused regulation. It's nothing to fear, I promise you. Nothing to fear at all. It's about outcomes. That can create a degree of uncertainty because you haven't got the sort of comfort blanket of prescriptive rules. But that lack of certainty and that freedom should also give you the opportunity to innovate. And it's really important that we encourage you to innovate. And it's equally important that you don't fear innovation. What you should be familiar with by now. I think your VP was slightly wrong. He was talking about Chapter 3 rather than Principle 3 in relation to conflicts, but it was good that he mentioned it. Thank you. I'm not going to go through these. The key ones are the ones highlighted in red. You should know these. And this is where the principles actually drive compliance for firms. If you look at the code, if you read the code, it talks about the language of ownership, the language of responsibility. You're all professional people. We want you to be responsible. We want you to take responsibility for your risk and compliance. It makes our life a lot easier. Equally, what you should be familiar with by now, outcomes are mandatory, absolutely. They describe what firms and individuals are expected to achieve to comply with the principles. Indicative behaviours, as it says, specify the sort of behaviour that may establish compliance with the principles or contravention of the principles. It's a helpful guide. But the key message is, as I say, it provides you with the opportunity to innovate. And you've gone from prescription to freedom, from rules to outcomes. It's very helpful in those circumstances. And one of the firms that we've been engaging with recently, since the introduction of the new code, took that opportunity to innovate in their client care procedures. The lady is a sole practitioner. She does a lot of mental health work. Her client care letter now is words and pictures. And it looks really good. It delivers the right message because she knows her clients, she understands their needs, and in those circumstances, she delivers a different and innovative service in relation to client care. And if you read Chapter 1 of the code, certain things have to be in writing. It doesn't say it has to be in a client care letter. Other things you have to tell them about their right to challenge a bill. It doesn't have to be in writing. So it gives you the opportunity to think about how you deliver your services. I think we've made the point, haven't we? Freedom to innovate. Freedom brings with it a responsibility. I think it's George Bernard Shaw, isn't it, that says liberty means responsibility. And speaking with Simon this morning, he also says with great power comes great responsibility. And I think as a regulator, that's one of the lessons that we've got to learn. We have great regulatory powers. We have great statutory powers that we can use where appropriate. But we have to understand that when we use those powers, we have a responsibility to use them in a proportionate and targeted and consistent manner. Okay? You know, what we do think in relation to how you implement your systems and controls, how you do it is up to you. You're grown-ups, you know what to do, you know your firms. We are not advocating a specific approach. We're not advocating one size fits all. You've probably heard it through the road shows. It's entirely up to you as to what you do and how you do it. I had the joys of, before news night last night, counting and reading the code last night, thinking how many references there are made to systems and controls throughout the Code of Conduct. It's quite a few references. I'll share with you the magic number later. But there's a consistency of language. You have effective systems and controls in place, and they're appropriate to the size and complexity of the firm and the nature of the work undertaken, and enable you to assess all relevant circumstances. Know your firms, know your business, know your clients, and think about what you need to do to deliver to those clients and achieve the principles. Okay? Actually, it's 7 mandatory outcomes. I've written it down here, so there you go. 7 mandatory outcomes that reference systems and compliance, and we'll walk through these. So we're expecting you to have systems and compliance for identifying and assessing potential conflicts of interest. One of the firms we engaged with recently was a sole practitioner. He's the money laundering officer, he's the IMO, he's the complaints handling partner, he's the COLP designate, he's the COFA designate. His client's inception process is, I know who I act for, I know who my relationships are. When I'm checking conflicts, it's just, do I know you? Have I acted for you? Is there an own interest conflict? Are you in conflict with any of the clients I currently act for? That system is perfectly adequate for a sole practitioner. He knows his business, he knows what to do. Equally, though, we've been working with a 4-partner firm who's a new firm, and they say, well, our system's a bit like that too. You know, we all know what we're doing. Everyone knows who we're acting for, and we all regularly share what we're doing. Well, what happens if you're off sick, you're on holiday? What happens if you don't have appropriate systems for the size of your firm? You may take on a client and there's a conflict of interest. So those are the sort of things we need to think about. So you've got those systems for conflicts. You've also got to have those systems in place under outcome 4.5 to identify any risks to client confidentiality. And let's not forget, these are all mandatory requirements. They're mandatory, outcomes are all mandatory, but they don't tell you how to do it. You've got to have systems, but how they are is up to you, okay? Okay, you need to also have some systems in place to comply with the principles. And I think this is the key thing. Simon mentioned this morning, and it's been a theme for today. We're still in difficult economic times. You've got to have effective systems for monitoring financial stability. You know, we have, again, small firms who undertake manual reviews of all their files to work out, well, how, you know, and their billing processes, how long is their lock-up period? So at least they're doing something proactive. It isn't a computerized system, but at least they're thinking of lock-up. Equally, in these very sort of difficult financial times, we have firms that take no consideration at all of financial stability. What are their lock-up periods? They're very busy. They're too busy to bill properly. They're too busy to credit control. That doesn't work. You're not too busy to be profitable. It's fundamental that you retain financial stability. You've got to have an appropriate system in place. Some of the relationship management firms we work with have very sophisticated systems. They know how profitable every member of their staff is, every fee earner. Slightly worrying for the partners because they know how profitable each partner is as well. But those are the sort of things you need to think about. Financial stability is absolutely key, because if you're not profitable, you're not going to survive in, as we say, a very competitive environment. The legal services market has been opened up. ABSs are coming through. They will steal your market if you're not careful. So you have to be on the ball and on the game to make sure that you can compete with those people. Right. You've also got, in addition to systems for compliance, you've got to have reporting and notification systems in place as well. And it places an emphasis. The whole of OFR is placing an emphasis on responsibility for regulation lies at first instance with the regulated community. It's your job first. It's our job afterwards. Okay. And so you've got to report and notify things to us. And that includes, again, financial difficulty or serious misconduct. And talking to Chris this morning, we were talking about a self-report. What our lesson learned really in relation to self-reporting is that we have to have the right response to those self-reports. A particular matter, a firm self-reported a cashier taking a small amount of money from petty cash. There was no access to client account whatsoever, and when they self-reported to us, they had disciplined that cashier, they'd sacked them, and they'd demonstrated to us that client account was perfectly intact. The initial response from the supervisor was to commission forensic investigations to go and undertake a full audit of that firm's accounts. Thankfully, we have systems and management controls within supervision to say, well, actually, that's not appropriate. The firm have self-reported. It's not an appropriate response, taking those facts to suddenly send in forensic accountants to crawl over client account when we have evidence that that client account is safe. So the outcome actually was that we engaged with the firm. They demonstrated the systems that they were putting in place to address that situation to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we have focused our attention on that cashier in obtaining a Section 43 order under the Solicitors Act to make sure that they don't engage in legal practice again. And rather worryingly, they were applying throughout that process to work in other firms to get jobs as a legal cashier. So we're focusing on where the real risks are and hoping and ensuring that you're putting in the right systems to ensure that these sort of things don't happen. Right, okay. I don't want people to worry about demonstrating achievement of the outcomes. Demonstrating achievement of outcomes shouldn't create increased regulatory costs. I know Frank Mayer, who in his foreword to his book from Legal Risk LLP, said the practice of law in England and Wales will, on the 6th of October 2011, almost certainly become the most heavily regulated in the world. I don't necessarily agree. It's about freedom of delivery of services. It's not about over-regulation. As I say, if there are increased regulatory costs, we've got to think about how that works for you in the profession, because we don't want to create that increased regulatory burden. And you've probably heard this message from Anthony Townsend, the Chief Executive, Samantha Barras, the Executive Director of Supervision. If firms get things wrong, which they will, it's hard enough earning a living out there in private practice. It's hard enough being profitable. But if they were well-intentioned, we will determine the risks and, where appropriate, engage constructively. Again, that depends on the circumstance, and I can't give you, we will always engage constructively when you're taking money from client account, but we will engage constructively where the risks determine that that's an appropriate outcome. And another example, we had a firm beating their accountants to the mark in self-reporting some issues that the accountants were going to forward to us with their accountants report. There were fundamental issues with their failing to do regular reconciliations. They reported that to us. The supervisor has agreed a compliance plan with that firm to put in those reconciliations every 5 weeks. They sent them reconciliations over a 3-month period to show that they're demonstrating they're doing that. And again, there's no need then for regulatory or disciplinary action because we've sorted it through appropriate and targeted engagement. We are at the moment surveying 1,000 firms because, again, we want to understand if there is an increase in regulatory costs. We want to measure the impact of OFR. There was a baselining exercise last year as to what drives regulatory compliance. We want to understand the impact of OFR on the firms out there and strengthen our understanding of the costs of compliance. You'll be, if you're one of the lucky 1,000 firms, you'll be called by an organisation who will take you through a questionnaire to try and understand what OFR means to your businesses. That gives you an opportunity to really share your thoughts, get some things off your chest. We welcome that. It's really, really important. But at least we can then measure to whether actually we're achieving what we hope to achieve through OFR. We've done 500 of the firms. There's another 500 to go. The other thing, as I say, is about demonstrating outcomes. I personally don't think that you have to fundamentally change your business to be compliant under this new regime. You know, if your wheel is round and it's working, don't change it, don't fix it. You know, understand the code, though. Know your clients and know your business, and in 1,000 battles you won't be defeated, to misquote Sun Tzu. You know, ultimately, if you know those things, you won't have any problems. But equally, this is an opportunity. It's the golden opportunity to innovate. And whilst we talk about systems and whilst the outcomes talk about having mandatory systems of compliance, it's not just about having a system. It's like when I used to at law school, you buy the book and don't read it. I've bought the book, I'm okay, I'll pass that exam. No, you've actually got to read it. You've got to implement your systems. That's the important thing. And at the end of the day, Chapter 7, Principle 8 of the Code, Chapter 10 is all about driving good risk management, which will ultimately, hopefully, mean that your businesses are successful and compete in this new legal landscape. There are some tools to help you. Has anyone actually read OFR at a glance? Yeah? So thank you very much indeed for reading it. It's very important. I think it's a useful tool. It doesn't actually answer many questions. A lot of it is, it's up to you, and it's up to your professional judgment. But at least, hopefully, also that combined with the ethics helpline or the guidance helpline, that will help you steer your firm and steer your thoughts as to where you need to go with OFR. Sign up for the SRA Update newsletter. That's helpful as well. If you have a supervisor, fantastic. Engage with them. They won't safe harbour you. They won't tell you what to do with your business, but they will be able to engage with you about issues that concern you. If you have a relationship manager, again, they will engage with you. But no one knows your business as well as you do. And so that's the important thing to think about. It's up to you. It's your responsibility. And equally, it's our responsibility to regulate in a proportionate fashion. My email address is on here. If you really want to get something off your chest, you can email me. If you've got a supervisor or a relationship manager, again, speak with them. The two managers of supervision are very keen to enter into a dialogue with the profession where you've got concerns. And so, you know, don't hesitate to contact us. I think that's the end. You've been very attentive. Thank you very much indeed.